Yo, what's up guys, Alf here, and today I'm going to be doing a full in-depth deck breakdown of this mono blue Trackhand Harbinger Merfolk deck in Historic that I've been doing really well with on the ladder recently. As you can see from the screenshot here, I'm currently 19-2 with this list, including a 6-0 undefeated run against Dimir, which I think is the most common deck right now. Now before I get into it, there's going to be an importable deck list down in the description if you want to try the list out for yourself. And also, if you're an MTG Zone Premium member, I'm going to be putting out a full in-depth deck guide article about this deck in the next few days that'll have a bunch more details, a full sideboard guide, how I change the deck for best of one, and some tips and tricks to help you play the deck as well. So as soon as that's out, I'll have a link to it down in the description. Keep your eyes peeled for that if you're a premium member. But anyway, with that all out of the way, this is my Historic Merfolk deck, and I'm really excited to return to Merfolk because it's an archetype I've been working on quite a lot over the past the past year really, especially with Trackhand Trainer. But in previous iterations of Historic, it didn't really feel that viable to me. First of all, because the deck really struggled to ever beat Goblin Bombardment, but now with the Ajani ban, I think Bombardment is likely to see way less play, which is a huge bonus for the Merfolk archetype. Secondly, like a lot of other decks, it really struggled to beat Eldrazi, while that was really dominant as well. But now with the Eldrazi Temple ban, Eldrazi as a deck is going to become less popular, less consistent, and less powerful. Not to mention, we also recently got Harbinger of the Seas, which is one of the other reasons I wanted to return to the archetype, which really does improve your matchup against not only 3-color decks, but also decks built around lands like Eldrazi and Valakut and Lotusfield as well. So that's a really big bonus to, some of the more difficult matchups that Merfolk had in the past. Obviously, Harbinger of the Seas and Magus are two of the most format warping cards right now, so I really also wanted to try a list like Merfolk where you really get to maximize these sorts of cards, right? Some people are already adapting their list in order to account for Harbinger, meaning that if you're running it in a deck like Dimir, if you come across another Dimir deck that's running a lot of basics or way to find basics, it doesn't really feel that effective. Whereas in this list, because we have so many other Merfolk synergies, it's really powerful. So first of all, by far and away the best one is Harbinger plus Master of the Pearl Trident, because if we get a Harbinger down and the opponent has at least one non-basic in play, we basically give them islands, which then gives our whole board unblockable, which is insanely strong with Master. But outside of that, it's obviously a Merfolk, so it gets buffs from our other creatures, it gets ward off Svilen, it gets buffs off all of our Lord effects, like Master, like Hexcatcher, and like Readery as well. Not to mention, we're also a mono-blue deck, so we're very resilient to opponents, Harbingers, and Maguses as well, because we're running 15 basic islands in the deck, so we're very resilient to the land hoses, and we get to maximize Harbinger in this list as well, which is a really big deal. Then secondly, Trackhand Trainer. This feels like a very underplayed card, and unlocks so much stuff in Merfolk. So if you've not seen this card before, it's a 1-mana Alchemy Merfolk, 1/1, and you can exhaust it and pay a blue mana to conjure Training Grounds into play, which basically means it's a one-shot ability. Once you use it, you can't use it again. And then it also has this other ability, 5 mana to draw a card, which once you have a Training Grounds in play goes down to 3 mana, which obviously, that's not great, but it will be useful in longer games. But it does have some really nice synergies with a lot of the other cards in the deck. So first of all, if you can assemble Trackhand Trainer in multiples, if you get 2 of these down and you get 2 Training Grounds down, this ability goes down to 1 mana draw a card, which is that is an insane card advantage engine, especially when you pair it with Nykthos, right? Even without 2 Training Grounds in play, if we have Nykthos in play, and you can see how many blue pips we've got in the deck, loads of these cards are double blue, including Trackhand Trainer itself, by the way. If we have Trackhand Trainer and the Training Grounds in play, that's immediately 2 blue pips for Nykthos, so that gives us an insane access to card advantage off Trackhand Trainer, which is really sick. Then secondly, we also have Mindspring Merfolk, which is one of the only other good playable 1-drops as well. This has another exhaust ability where you can play double blue and X to draw X cards and put a +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk you control, which isn't that great in terms of mana efficiency, but again, if we have Trackhand Trainer and at least 1 Training Grounds in play, this becomes double blue, buff your whole board and draw 2 cards, which is very good rate. If we can get 2 Training Grounds in play, this becomes double blue, buff your whole board, draw 4 cards, and then obviously you can pay extra mana for the X if you want to, so that it also makes Mindspring Merfolk a lot better, and it also kind of gives you access to like an infinite combo as well. If you have Trackhand Trainer plus Nykthos with a lot of blue pips and Mero Readery, you can basically draw and play through your whole deck, because you play a Merfolk, you tap Nykthos for a lot of mana, play a Merfolk, use the Readery to untap Nykthos, play another Merfolk, keep untapping your Nykthos to produce a ton of mana, and then if you run out of Merfolk, you can just pump all of your mana into Trackhand Trainer to keep drawing cards. Then if you draw another Merfolk, you put that in play, untap Nykthos, get more blue pips in play to the point where you can just draw through your entire deck, put Master of Pearl Tridents in play to buff your whole board, and then finally end with a Harbinger, give your opponent, islands, and then you're just basically free to attack through for lethal, even if you only have a few creatures in play to begin with, which is really strong. Now, one thing to be wary of is that if you do this, you want to make sure that you hold on to Harbinger as long as possible, because if you play Harbinger it shuts off your own Nykthos, which is a mistake I've made a couple times so far. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to record any of the matches where it happened, so it doesn't happen that often, but it's really nice to have access to, especially in longer games as well. And then outside of that, I'm just going to go through all the other individual cards and explain what they're here for. Mindspring Merfolk, kind of already explained this one, works very well with Trackhand Trainer, but it is just useful in longer games as well, and also it gives you another way to buff your board if you just need to, grow your creatures for combat damage, which can come up quite a few times. Then Shoreline Scout basically just provides you consistency by enabling you to keep hands where you have more Merfolk than lands, right? If you have, for example, you keep a 2-lander with an island and a Nykthos, and you need the second blue source for cards like Master of the Pearl Trident and Merfolk Trickster, you can just use Shoreline Scout to turn whatever the worst Merfolk in your hand into a tropical island. And then second of all, it also makes running 4 Nykthos way more easy in this deck, because obviously the issue with Nykthos is if you draw it in multiples, it's pretty bad. So Shoreline Scout can turn your second or third copy of Nykthos into a playable tropical island. And then not to mention, it does also get +1/+0 on basically every single one of your turns as well. You can trigger this at instant speed with Merfolk's Trickster as well. So it is a decently sized Merfolk for a 1-drop as well. So very good at improving consistency in terms of our mana base. Then at the 2-drop slot, we've got Vidalian Hexcatcher, which is one of the best Lord effects in Merfolk. It has flash, meaning we can, keep up other cards like Counterspell, post sideboard at instant speed, and then we can flash it in, buff our whole board, and then it also gives us the ability to counter non-creature spells, which is very relevant, especially against interaction and sweepers, but is also very good against non-creature combo and control decks as well. Then, like I said, Master of the Pearl Trident, one of the best cards in the deck, especially right now when blue decks are very popular, especially Dimir I've faced a lot recently, so giving your whole board unblockable against Dimir is one of the best ways to win those sorts of matchups. And then Merfolk Trickster, there is kind of an argument here whether you want to go for this or Floodpit's Drowner that I'll quickly bring up, which is another option you've got in Merfolk. The main reason why I prefer Trickster to Drowner, though, is that the ability to remove all abilities from your opponent's creatures comes up way more often and has felt very important, especially against creature combo decks. So Floodpit's Drowner is another option where you get to tap an opponent's creature and put a stun counter on it, and then it has the ability to shuffle both cards in the deck if it still has a stun counter on it, which is better in longer games, especially if you want to be able to remove the creature. But like I said, Historic is still a very fast format, and the ability to remove the creature's ability at instant speed is very big, especially, against cards like Tameo to remove flying once it's attacked, or Psychic Frog so you can block it once it's got flying itself as well. Not to mention, like I said, creature combo decks being able to remove stuff at instant speed is very important. Not to mention, also cards with double pips are very valuable for Nykthos as well. So personally, I prefer Trickster over Floodpit's Drowner. The Mero Readery, like I said, does enable kind of an infinite combo with Nykthos and Trackhand Trainer, which is pretty nice, but even outside of that, it's a very effective card, gives your whole board +1/+1, and then also kind of unlocks extra mana, right? Because if we have a Readery in play, we can use its ability to untap our own lands to get multiple Merfolk in play. It basically makes our 1-mana Merfolk free, which is huge, especially for Trackhand Trainer, which is quite a mana-intensive card. And then past that, once we already have a big board, we can also use this to tap down your opponent's creatures, which is really good at clearing the way to attack in. Then Harbinger of the Seas, like I said, one of the most format-warping cards right now. There's still quite a few decks running 3-color mana bases, or mana bases with not a lot of basics in, so this can just catch the opponent out and sometimes win the game on its own. Not to mention, it's obviously incredibly good against decks that are built around lands like Eldrazi, like Lotus Field, like Valakut as well. So one of the most important cards in the whole format right now. And this deck really gets to maximise it. And then Spyland of Sea and Sky, I really like this card as a 4-of, even though it's legendary, because the format has suddenly become way more interactive. Like I said, Dimir, Control, Midrange, very, very common right now. And so having a card that gives all our other Merfolk Ward 1 and becomes indestructible once we have 2 Merfolk in play is really sick. And then obviously it's a consistent card advantage engine as well. So this card feels incredibly good right now. And I don't mind running it as a 4-of, because once you have one of these in play, you're going to tend to run away with the long game anyway. Then in terms of the mana base, not too much to talk about here. Like I said, 4 Nykthos is just incredibly good with Trackhand Trainer, Mindspring Merfolk. It's just great at getting ahead if we do want to empty our hand very quickly. And then it doesn't really matter that we're running it in multiples, because like I say, we can use Shoreline Scout to turn it into a tropical island if we do draw it in multiples. And then 15 basics is great to ensure that we don't get cheesed out by opponents' Harbingers and Maguses of the Moon. Sink into Stupor is basically free to run as a 4-of in a mono blue deck. Basically just gives us some extra interaction. And it's especially nice if we do, use Shoreline Scout to get other actual lands if we need to keep this as a piece of interaction. Can be used as a Counterbounce spell can be used on the stack as sort of a pseudo counterspell as well, so very useful. And then same sort of thing with Otawara, basically free here to run as a one-off to just bounce whatever problematic permanent the opponent has. So that's the main deck. Like I said, this has felt such a, powerful proactive deck that also gets to really maximize Harbinger, and I also think is just relatively well positioned right now while the format's, a little bit slower, a little bit more non-creature based, because we are particularly good playing at instant speed, having ways to counter non-creature spells, especially post-sideboard when we get access to more counter spells as well. Speaking of which, looking at the sideboard, we've got 4 copies of Mistcaller, which is a Merfolk that is very good against decks that are trying to cheat creatures into play, whether that's Reanimator, whether that's stuff like Green Sun Zenith or Chord of Calling. This is great against a number of decks, not really worth running in the main deck right now. Back during the Sorin format, I was running builds with Mistcaller in the main deck, but it doesn't really feel worth it now, but definitely worth running in this sideboard in my opinion. As you see in the gameplay later, I was originally running 3 Mistcaller, 4 Counterspell, but I found that the matchups where I want Mistcaller, I really want 4 copies, so I've ended up swapping the ratios around a little. Not to mention with 5 Counterspells that I'll get onto in a little bit, I didn't really feel there were too many matchups where I could take out 6 cards to bring in 6 Counterspells. So for me, it felt better to run 4 Mistcaller, 3 Counterspell. Speaking of which, I've also got 2 Spell Pierce, 3 Counterspell. For a number of matchups, especially against the control and mid-range decks, I am concerned about board sweepers, stuff like Path of Peril, Culling Ritual, Toxic Deluge, that are very good against us when we don't have Hexcatcher in play. So having these as a way to stop those is a really effective way of stopping the opponent kind of recovering when they're behind, which does tend to happen quite a lot because we do get on the board very early with this sort of deck. Spell Pierce is obviously much more efficient, requires us to hold up less mana, which does mean that it interferes with our proactive game plan a little bit less, especially because a lot of our Merfolk are sorcery speed. But again, it does become worse as the game goes on, so I like the 2-3 split with Counterspell here. Speaking of which, I also want to talk about why I'm not running Cavern of Souls in the mana base, and Counterspell is one of those reasons. This is a very important card post-sideboard, especially against combo decks, but also, like I said, against control to stop cards like board sweepers as well. Not to mention, Cavern of Souls also doesn't enable us to use Trackhand Trainer. It doesn't enable us to use Mindspring Merfolk's activated ability, which is 2 of the most important things in this deck. So I didn't really feel it was worth running Cavern of Souls, even though counterspells see play for those reasons. Not to mention, we're already pretty resistant to counterspells anyway, so it hasn't really felt necessary. But like I said, Trackhand Trainer and Mindspring Merfolk are 2 of the most important cards to use in this sort of deck. So having Cavern of Souls as your, blue lands in this deck does kind of lock you off using these in a lot of situations, which isn't ideal. And then next up we got Surgical Extraction, which is very useful against graveyard decks, obviously, just good against a number of combo decks that can potentially go over the top of us. And then finally we got 4 copies of Dismember, which originally when I was running previous builds of this deck was stuff like Into the Floodmoor that provides a little bit more flexible interaction, especially when Bombardment was legal. But now, without Bombardment, Into the Floodmoor would basically just be used to answer creatures, and so I feel like swapping to Dismember is just going to be better, especially against decks like Auras. The life loss is kind of awkward against the burn decks like Wizards, potentially, but again, I feel like against those decks, permanently removing their Symmetry Sages and Dreadhorde Arcanists is so much better than just bouncing it back to their hand, especially when a lot of their creatures have haste. So Dismember has definitely felt like the best one, especially because we don't really have any other life loss in the deck, right? Other than Sink into Stupor, our mana base is very, very painless as well, so losing some life off Dismember hasn't really been an issue so far for me. So that's the deck overall. Like I said, I think it's incredibly well positioned right now. I think a lot of the weaknesses of the proactive game plan of Merfolk have now basically been removed from the format. I feel like when there's a lot of control and mid-range in the format right now, having cards like Hexcatcher and Sviland that are very resilient to interaction is a really big deal. Harbinger can cheese out some free wins. Master of the Pearl Trident is incredibly effective with Harbinger, and also, like I said, blue decks in general are very popular right now, so this is basically just give your whole board unblockable in a lot of situations as well. Not to mention, you have access to like an infinite combo, Trackhand, Mindspring, Sviland, all give you ways to grind into longer games, so you can outrace stuff like Psychic Frog and Tameo and stuff as well. So the deck feels very resilient, very well equipped to use and dodge the land hoses in general, and just feels very flexible post-sideboard as well. So I've been really liking this list so far. The biggest weakness that I've felt playing matchups so far is the Izzet decks with a lot of cheap interaction, especially the Chorus package with Ribald Shanty and Hymn to the Ages has felt kind of difficult to consistently beat. But outside of that, everything else has felt very beatable to me. So this definitely feels like one of the front runners that I've tried so far. Anyway, like I said, if you want to try this out for yourself, check the importable deck list in the description. Next up, I've got some gameplay so you guys can see the deck in action. If you've got any questions about the deck or comments, definitely let me know in the comments, and I'd love to chat to you about that. Either way, hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Big up! Okay, so we're going second here. And yeah, this looks good to me. I mean, obviously it's a little bit vulnerable to Thoughtseize, right? If the opponent is playing a Thoughtseize deck and they take Sink into Stupor, we are just reliant on drawing more lands off the top, but we don't know we're against a Thoughtseize deck, so I think it's fine to keep. Mana Confluence into Guide of Souls is interesting. So we could play an island here, but I'm worried we're against an aggressive deck, and in which case dealing 3 to ourselves might be unnecessary, not to mention that, you know, there's a chance we want the 4th land to be able to double spell in a few turns anyway, so I'd rather avoid the life loss here, I think. Wow, Malevolent Rumble. Oh, okay, they're on Primal Prayers. Interesting, okay. So I think we're actually relatively well set up here against Primal Prayers, because obviously with the Spawn token they can now cast Primal Prayers on turn 3, but we have Hexcatcher available to just counter it, which I think is a pretty good trade for us, especially because if they are running, you know, well, Primal Prez, their whole deck has to kind of be built around it to a certain degree, which means getting rid of their key card is going to be huge. So I think they probably attack here first to try and bait out interaction to clear the way for Primal Prez. We could obviously Trickster away the Guide of Souls, which is pretty effective because they kind of need Guide of Souls for Primal Prez to be effective, but I don't love that because if they have a backup Guide of Souls, if we just go Trickster here and then, you know, kill them Guide of Souls, they could just go Primal Prez, second Guide of Souls, Guardian Evangel, and then we're in trouble. So they don't cast the Primal Prez, probably worried about Counterspell, but now we have Hexcatcher, which is basically Counterspell on a body, so not bad exchange for us, I don't think. Okay, they do have Fragment Reality. I mean, we do get a 1-drop out of it, but now we don't have a great way to answer Primal Prez itself. Oh, okay. Now we do. Now we have Sink into Stupor, although that is only a temporary solution. So I think what I'm going to do here is attack with the Trackhand Trainer. And since Sink into Stupor is only a temporary solution, unless they try and play it here with, you know, using the Spawn token because they missed their 4th land drop, I don't love it because they'll just recast it next turn. So I think what I want to do here is attack to try and bait them into attacking with Guide of Souls, and then I'll do the Trickster, try and take out the Guide of Souls so that they only really punish us if they have a backup here. Because if we take out the Guide of Souls, then obviously if they have 3 drops, they can still cast them off the Primal Prez, but they can't combo immediately, which is the main thing I'm worried about, unless they have a backup Guide of Souls, which they very well could do. But again, the alternative here is waiting for them to cast Primal Prez, using Sink into Stupor into it, and then they'll just recast it again next turn, especially now they have a 4th land drop, right? If they didn't have a 4th land and they used the Spawn token, then it kind of locks them out of mana a little bit. But so yeah, it is a little bit scary because obviously they can now cast stuff at instant speed, and they have 3 mana, so if they have a tutor effect they could go tutor, get Guide of Souls, but then they would also need a win condition on top of that, like a Guardian Evangel. Now we can put a Training Grounds into play, and we have a decent amount of mana off Nykthos already, right? We're already up to 4 Devotion here, so okay, they've got to stop during the upkeep. Is this Guardian Evangel? If it is, I think we Sink into Stupor the Primal Prez. Yeah, okay. So Guardian Evangel. So, no, I think we do Sink into Stupor the Primal Prez here because that basically just means they waste the Guardian Evangel. Obviously, they can recast Primal Prez next turn and they'll be up to 4 energy, but if we let them do this, they could have cast 3 Guardian Evangels and just got a bunch of blockers in play and cut us off the 3 mana that we have now anyway. So this gets rid of the Guardian Evangel because they have to discard it at the beginning of the end step. So I think we've done pretty well here, right? Because now we know they've only got Primal Prez plus 1 card, which means they're pretty far off from being able to combo. Obviously, if the last card in their hand is another Guardian Evangel, they'd be able to do 4 next upkeep. But again, like I said, they'd need to have exactly Primal Prez plus that for it to be effective. Don't think we want to attack here because, especially with Nykthos and Reejery, there's a chance that we could just draw our entire deck here, potentially, if we can get enough Devotion. Because we can use Reejery to untap Nykthos every time we put a Merfolk in play and just keep drawing outside of that. So they drew another land, which is great for us. And it doesn't look like they have any creatures to use with Primal Prez, which is absolutely huge here. So I'm going to lead on the Reejery. We could have gone with the... actually, maybe I should have gone for Master of the Pearl Trident first. So unfortunately, we don't have enough mana to untap and reactivate the Nykthos here, but we can go Master of the Pearl Trident, untap, and have mana open for Trickster, which is actually pretty important here, because if they do have a win condition in hand, and they happen to draw a Guide of Souls, if they go Primal Prayer's Guide of Souls, in response to them casting their win condition like a Sigardian Evangel, we can flash in the Trickster to tap down the Guide of Souls and remove its ability so that they can't combo off, which is a pretty big deal. Not to mention, like I said, because of the Trackhand Trainer, I think next turn we can potentially go Infinite, especially because we've got a backup Nykthos here, because we can tap the Nykthos, draw a bunch. Okay, they have Fragment for the Regery, so that kills the Trickster and cuts us off using the Infinite combo. But we do get another Trackhand Trainer here, which is pretty nice, because now we can well, we'll see what they do. Obviously, we want to hold the 2 mana available for Trickster, but if we don't use the Trickster, we can put a Training Grounds into play, and then it becomes 1 mana, draw a card. But yeah, opponent just scoops it up. So, post-sideboard here, I mean, the counter spells and Dismember are definitely cards I'm looking at to bring in. I'm just trying to think of numbers. I don't think we can bring in all of them, really. Which is more important out of Counterspell and Dismember? I mean, being able to stop Primal Prize itself seems pretty big. I don't know if Svilen's very big in this matchup because it's not that grindy. They obviously did have Fragment Reality, but, you know, I imagine this is a deck where we basically just want to cut them off the combo and then it doesn't really matter. We should be winning the long game off Trackhand Trainer and, you know, Mindspring Merfolk and that sort of stuff anyway. Also really like Harbinger of the Seas here as well. We saw from their mana base they've got a lot of Confluences, they've got a lot of presumably starting towns and maybe not that many basics, or at least a lot of their mana base is going to be, you know, dual lands. So feel pretty confident in this matchup, but we do have to be wary about their early combo. That's the main thing, I think. So this hand is a definite keep, right? We've got Hexcatcher to stop Primal Prize. We've got Trickster to temporarily stop stuff like Guide of Souls to stop them comboing. Wow. Boggart Bog. So they're playing black as well. So that makes me think they're probably running Crucius to tutor. Tutor Primal Prayers, which is something I've tried in the past, but it seems incredibly sketchy doing it right now with Harbinger and Magus in the format. But it is still early days, so I guess, you know, people are still experimenting. Okay, Ranger Captain, presumably going to tutor a Guide of Souls here. We'll just flash in the Hexcatcher here because we want to have it in play for next turn for the Primal Prayers, obviously. And then I'd love to draw a land here. Missing land drops would be pretty awkward, but we still have options if we don't. Okay. So I'm kind of tempted to run out the Trackhand Trainer here because we do, you know, if they do cast Primal Prayers, I want to have Merfolk in play to be able to sacrifice. And I don't really want to sacrifice Hexcatchers if I can avoid it. So I'm going to get the 2 Trackhands in play here just so we have, you know, Merfolk that we're happy to sack if they do go for Primal Prayers. Okay, there's Guide of Souls. It looks like they might just be on the generic beatdown game plan, which I think plays well with what we're doing here. We're going to be able to just outscale them on the board pretty easily with our Lord effects here, I think. Recruiter of the Guard. So they're running a lot of tutor effects. Wow, that's interesting. I haven't played this build since Crucius got nerfed, I don't think. Or maybe I have, but maybe I didn't realize that Recruiter could tutor up nerfed Crucius. That's pretty interesting. I've not seen that one before. But yeah, going to ship it back here, and now we've got access to both Trackhand Trainer. Well, we could activate Trackhand Trainer if we wanted, but now we've got access to Trickster and Hexcatcher here, which was nice. Safekeeper. Okay, so I was planning to Trickster the Crucius just to stop them tutoring, stop them getting access to extra mana, because extra mana is pretty awkward with the Hexcatcher here. And even though they do have Sylvan Safekeeper in play, I think I'm still going to go for the Trickster on Crucius here. Because, well, I'll wait till main phase 2. I'll let them attack first. Because if they do end up sacking a land to protect the Crucius here, they're basically trading a land for a treasure, which is a great exchange for us, I think. I mean, obviously they get to tutor as well, which is the main reason they do it. But with Hexcatcher in play here, I'm not too concerned about Primal Prayers. So we'll see if they sack a land here. Looks like they're going to. Yeah, so they sack a land to get them a treasure, which I think is quite a good exchange for us. They do pitch a 3-drop. Wow, they've got a lot of 3-drops in the deck. They've got Speaker as well. So now they have a Primal Prayers in hand, but, you know, with Hexcatcher, we should have good counterplay to that. So we could go for Readry, which would unlock a lot of mana. next turn. But I think it's important to have Hexcatcher up here because they could obviously end of turn kill the Hexcatcher with a Fragment Reality or a Fatal Push. So being able to, surprise the opponent by flashing in the Hexcatcher seems pretty big. But I'm going to go for the Reejerey here. Because, like I said, it just unlocks a lot of mana next turn. If they don't have exactly removal spell into Primal Prez, then we're good. And if we do, we're stopping them using Primal Prez anyway. So if they don't have exactly removal spell into Primal Prez, we're fine. And this way, it also just enables us to race way more quickly now. Yeah, so they go for Primal Prez. They've been missing land drops as well, so sacking the land is pretty big here. So now we can counter the Primal Prez. And now next turn, since this, basically comes down to who can race on the board, Reejerey should really unlock our ability to get multiple Lords in play really quickly and then start tapping down the opponent's creatures to clear the way for us to attack. Not to mention, I think the opponent kind of has to scramble now to try and find another Primal Prez to be able to go over the top of us. So Reejerey did make us go shields down for a turn, but I feel like it's worth it here. Especially now we've drawn a 1-drop Merfolk, because now we can go Reejerey, untap 1. Now Mindspring Merfolk kind of works as a ritual, and yeah, opponent just scoops it up, so we got there, nice. Okay, so we're on the play here against a Lurrus deck. And yeah, I think we can keep this, right? Being on the play means that we can dodge Thoughtseize with this Sink into Stupor, which is pretty nice. So obviously going to lead on the Mindspring Merfolk, and then obviously it depends on what the opponent does, whether we go for Hexcatcher or Trickster. Okay, Dark Slick, sure, so probably against Dimir here if I had to guess. See if they got Thoughtseize or Fatal Push, or maybe Ponder. Okay, they just ship it back. And we draw Master off the top, so I mean, running out the Master is kind of weak into Fatal Push, but if we wait on it and we go for the Hexcatcher instead, then we potentially open ourselves up to counter spells. So, tricky to say, because if they have Fatal Push, we're in trouble. And to be fair, thinking about it, maybe I should have gone for the Hexcatcher here, because the only instant speed thing they're likely to have here is Fatal Push, unless they're playing Consider. Right, if they don't have Fatal Push, yeah, so considering Arena gave away priority there, maybe I should have realised that the only thing they're likely to have there is Fatal Push. And then it's probably better to wait until the opponent's turn to then go for Hexcatcher. Okay, so they ship it back again, so now they represent Counterspell as well as Fatal Push, so I'm going to wait until their turn to now go for likely Hexcatcher, but there's a chance we might go for Trickster if they play a creature here. Or even if they do, I think we probably wait until the following turn to go for Trickster. So I'm going to run out the Hexcatcher here, and if they have a Counterspell for this, then they're likely to be shields down for our next turn. Okay, they've got Spell Snare, so they still have Counterspell up here, which is a little bit rough. So we could run out the Reejerey here, but we're playing into Counterspell. The alternative here is just shift it back and activate Mindspring Merfolk to draw 2. And honestly, I'm kind of tempted to do that, because the opponent hasn't committed to the board. I'm not worried about them snowballing with, they don't have a Tamiyo or a Psychic Frog in play, so I'm just going to play it slowly here. I don't want to play into their Counterspells. Again, we haven't seen anything that suggests they have instant speed cantrip style effects, or we haven't seen it yet anyway, so I think it makes more sense to just wait here, activate the Mindspring Merfolk, draw 2, and not play into whatever interaction they're obviously holding up here. Okay, interesting. So we find 2 Shoreline Scouts, so I think I'm going to lead on that, see if they have anything here, and we could obviously turn one of these Merfolk into a land. But I feel like 4 lands, especially with Nykthos, is enough, and we're probably going to need as many threats as we can afford here, I think. Thinking about it, I'm probably supposed to play the Reejerey first. I might have misplayed here, but I really don't want to give them a good target for Counterspell. I would rather get 3 separate threats into play here, because the Dimir lists I've seen recently are very unlikely to have sweepers in the main deck. So we could have gone for Reejerey there, but I actually quite like what we've done here, especially because all of our creatures are essentially 2 power. Right, obviously we need a land, or we need a way to get a Merfolk or an island in play. But, we've already got 6 power in play. The opponent doesn't have any threats. Okay, now they play Psychic Frog, so We can obviously use Trickster on that to tap it down, which again I don't love doing during my turn. I think it's pretty obvious to me that they have a counterspell in hand here. So we could obviously attack, but they can obviously just discard a single card in order to, you know, eat up one of the creatures. If they have a Fatal Push, they can potentially take out 2 of them here. So whilst we could get in for 4 damage, I think I prefer just keeping all of my creatures in play. Like I said, especially because most of the Dimir builds I've seen recently are all on single target removal. And then we can ship it back and we have access to double Trickster during the opponent's turn here. If they use counter spells to stop those, then that opens up the possibility of just going double Rejury during our turn. Which, you know, again, if they don't have sweepers, is going to be really difficult for them to come back from. So again, the whole idea here is I just don't want to give them good uses for counterspell, especially when they have been pretty slow to develop to the board this game. So my game plan here is basically if they go to combat, we Trickster the Psychic Frog. We could potentially let them attack first, but, you know, if they end up being happy to discard a lot of cards, then that's not great for us. So I'm going to go for Trickster here, tap down the Psychic Frog, which then clears the way for us to attack next turn. So it looks like opponent's thinking about using a counterspell here, which I'd be pretty happy about, right? I'd be really happy for them to burn a counterspell, especially because we've got a backup Trickster here. Okay, they let it through, so now we can tap down the Psychic Frog. Not only prevents them from getting a card this turn, but it also clears the way for us to attack next turn. Okay, another Psychic Frog. So very happy that we've got another Trickster here. And I'm going to tap for Nykthos just in case they're running, you know, Mana Leak style counterspells, and then we can pay the difference. So opponent in the tank about maybe countering this, which I'd be pretty happy with, right? If they tap down to a single mana, we can just go double Rejury, tap down the Psychic Frog anyway, and then we're dealing a huge amount of damage. Yeah, okay, they do go for counterspell. I'm actually pretty happy about that then. Unless, I'm trying to think if they have any 1-mana counterspells that can get them back out, you know, that can stop the Rejuries here. So we go for Rejury, presumably this resolves. Then we can go for the second Rejury. And then we can untap a land if we wanted to, but with Mindspring Merfolk, not really too much benefit to that. So I'm just going to tap down the Psychic Frog here. And wow, yeah, opponent just keeps it up. So not playing into the counterspells worked really nicely there. So post-sideboard, I don't think we want Harbinger because they're already running islands. And I do think post-sideboard they're likely to be bringing in sweepers against us. Obviously, there's maybe an argument for bringing in Dismember to deal with Psychic Frog and potentially Tamiyo as well. But I feel like we're the front-footed deck in this matchup. We're the aggro deck, they play the control deck. So I'd much rather bring in Spell Pierce and Counterspell, because post-sideboard they are likely to have stuff like Path of Peril or Toxic Deluge perhaps, and being able to consistently stop those, as well as, you know, being able to Spell Pierce, Fatal Push is going to be big, being able to Counterspell Psychic Frogs is going to be very big as well. So yeah, this matchup I see us as trying to go underneath them in the early game, but we do have tools to grind into the longer game as well. But yeah, I don't think we should be focusing on killing their creatures. I think we should be focused on committing to the board early and then forcing them to answer what we're doing. Well, that's been the best way to approach the matchup from my experience so far. Okay, so opponent leads on Thoughtseize here, and they've got a lot of options, right? They could take... Svilen's probably the most problematic card from their point of view because it can give our creatures Ward 1 and it's self-indestructible. There's maybe an argument for them taking Sink into Stupor, although it is pretty high variance, right? They're basically relying on us not drawing lands in the next couple turns. They can't really deny us a 1-mana play. They could take Trackhand Trainer, because that's another card that can snowball the game in the long term. Wow, okay, I wasn't expecting them to take Mindspring Merfolk. I mean, I think I'm going to lead on the Sink into Stupor here, because I don't want them to follow up with the second Thoughtseize and take our land, especially considering we've just drawn another 3-drop, right? If they Thoughtseize us again, if I was the opponent, I'd probably take Sink and just hope that I don't draw a third land in time. Now, running out Trackhand Trainer on 1 is a little bit awkward, because if they do Fatal Push it, then we don't get an opportunity to put a Training Grounds in play, which is really useful to just have. Okay, they're on Hall of Storm Giants, which is interesting. We don't have a turn 2 play, unfortunately, but thankfully we can still just sink a mana into the Trackhand trainer here just to get a Training Grounds into play. See if they've got anything at instant speed here. Okay, Drowning in the Lock. So they do kill the Trackhand trainer, but we get a Training Grounds in play, which is going to be great for... If we draw another Trackhand trainer off the top, then we can get another Training Grounds in play, and then we have 1 mana draw a card available. If we draw Mindspring Merfolk, then that also discounts that quite a bit as well. So we draw Counterspell, but I'm just going to jam Sphylen here, right? Like I said, we're the proactive deck in this matchup, and honestly, if they don't have a Counterspell for Sphylen, it's pretty difficult for them to kill without Prismatic Vista. Ah, okay, they got Shieldred's Edict. I guess we've also seen Drowning in the Lock as well, so they do have a few tools to be able to answer it, but... Okay, another Thoughtseize. Presumably they take Sphylen here, yeah. And then they Ponder. So it looks like we're already kind of down to top decks here. But we do have a lot of good draws, especially with Training Grounds in play now. Ah, okay, there's Psychic Frog. That's pretty scary. So we do have Sink into Stupor, but while they're tapped out, I think it makes way more sense to just get Reedry down. And then, you know, we can still bounce Psychic Frog with Sink into Stupor if that's relevant. And obviously having Counterspell available to defend Reedry is going to be pretty nice here. So unfortunately, we've got to let the Psychic Frog attack here, which isn't great when the game has become quite attrition-based. But having Reedry in play is going to be really important. Okay, so they have Lurrus here. Okay, nice. So we drew a Master of the Pearl Trident, which we can defend with Counterspell here. And we can still have Sink into Stupor up because we can untap a land off the Reedry, which is really nice. Now, unfortunately, they don't have... Oh, no, they do have an island in play. Those full art basics sometimes confuse me. But this is big because... You know, one of the best ways to win in this matchup, from my experience, is get Master down and defend it and basically give all of your Merfolk unblockable, because Psychic Frog does a very good job at blocking your creatures otherwise. Okay, we're definitely going to fight this on the stack. Like I said, resolving a Master here is going to be big. And we don't have to worry about Force of Negation, because we know they don't have another blue card in hand. So we get Master down... And we'll definitely connect, right? We're not going to be blocking at all. So puts them down to 11. We're definitely winning the race at the moment. And also the opponent doesn't have many cards in hand at the moment to discard to Psychic Frog. Now, if they attack, I probably have to let it through here because, like I said, Master is very, very important in this matchup. I'm just trying to think if we could block and force them to discard 2 cards, but they have Lurrus, which enables them to recover, right? If they discard creatures, for example, they can just go Lurrus and recast them anyway, so... Okay, they do run out the Lurrus, which, you know, the lifelink is going to be relevant in terms of racing. Wow, okay, Reedry off the top is really nice, because now we can tap down the Lurrus to enable us to connect with the Master, because you've got to remember, Master doesn't give itself Island Walk. So now we can get into, for 8, they only have blue mana available here, so only bounce spells we need to be worried about. Puts them down to 3, and now they have to start thinking about holding back the Psychic Frog as a blocker, which is huge for us. I mean, having said that, they need to kill the Master here, or they're just dead. Because they have islands in play. But, you know, if they do have a way to kill Master, then having Sink to, you know, bounce the Lurrus feels very big. Okay, so attacking him with the Psychic Frog, presumably to try and dig towards a removal spell for the Master here. Okay, and they got a Ponder as well, so they're obviously digging towards Fatal Push for the Master, I'd guess. But even if they do Fatal Push the Master here or kill it with whatever removal spell they've got, we can still just bounce the Lurrus attacking with both Reedries here. So they would need removal plus Counterspell for our Sink. Wow, okay, 3 steps ahead looting, so they're just trying to dig for an answer, and they didn't find one, so we managed to get there. Nice. Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, this hand looks pretty decent, right? We've got Trackhand Trainer for, you know, being able to grind into the long game if we are against an interactive deck. We've got Shoreline Scout, which does provide us with a decent amount of early aggression, especially when backed up with Hexcatcher, and Trickster if we're up against a creature deck as well. Okay, Young Wolf. So looks like we're against Yawgmoth here then. And I think we're probably interested in going for Hexcatcher here to be able to counter Chord of Calling and Zenith. So I'm going to attack here, trying to bait out the block here, and then we can flash in the Hexcatcher. Obviously, they do get the Young Wolf back as a 2/2 here, but it means they get less sacrifice value off it, right? If they do have some sacrifice synergies like Birthing Ritual, then they lose the Young Wolf for good, which is very big, you know, if they manage to get Yawgmoth down later. So they have fetched both basics, meaning that Harbinger isn't going to be as effective against them this game. Okay, Marionette Apprentice. So I think I'm going to attack him with the Shoreline Scout here, because I'd take the trade with any of their creatures here, really. Get in for 3, and then I think I'm just going to go for double Trackhand Trainer here. We get one of the training grounds down at the very least, and then next turn we can just start drawing if we want. Obviously, this does mean we don't have Trickster available this turn, but without any Mana Dorks in play, I'm not too worried about that. Okay, there is Delighted Halfling, but yeah, not too concerned about what they've got in play so far. Obviously, they can potentially... Zenith X equals 1 is interesting. Maybe they're going to go for a second Young Wolf, which makes me think they might have a Yawgmoth in hand already, which is pretty scary, but we're definitely going to counter that either way. Don't mind losing the Shoreline Scout here. And then we'll see if they attack. Might attack with the Young Wolf. I'll probably just let the damage through here, because, you know, even though they don't have a ton of interaction... Although, actually, no, think about it. If they attack with the Young Wolf, I'll probably block with a Trackhand Trainer and then make a Training Grounds with that one, because Yawgmoth as a deck is unlikely to have Fatal Push in the main deck, I don't think. So here, not going to attack. We maybe could have attacked with the Trackhand Trainer that has just produced a Training Grounds, actually. Maybe I should have gone in just because that could have been 2 damage, uncontested. Okay, there is another Young Wolf. So they can chord for X equals 4 here, but we have enough creatures in play to be able to counter that. So we'll exhaust, make another Training Grounds, and then I think I'll just draw 3 here. Again, we could Trickster, but I'd rather save that. You know, and drawing 3, especially this early in the game, is going to be a really big deal, I think. So we draw a Sphylen, which is very nice, especially against Yawgmoth. Giving all of our creatures Ward 1 really limits their ability to just decimate our board, which Yawgmoth is usually pretty good at, especially against smaller creature decks. So getting Sphylen in play next turn is going to be a priority for me. I'd love to draw a Nykthos here as well, but we'll see what we draw here. So we are technically shields down, but because of Hexcatcher, we're not really, right? Okay, we find a sink into Stupor, which is nice, because that then enables us to potentially fight on the stack if they do cast a Yawgmoth, you know, avoid getting it in play. But either way, I'm still just going to run out this Sphylen here, because giving our creatures Ward 1 is going to be huge against Yawgmoth. Now, obviously, they could use Yawgmoth to take out the Sphylen here, but, you know, it's a 5/4. It will take 5 activations. They don't have a source of life gain right now either. And especially with Hexcatcher, I'm just going to run out all the creatures that I've got here so that, you know, we've got multiple Hexcatcher activations if they do try and chord for Yawgmoth or Zenith for Yawgmoth potentially. So they are getting priority here, but that doesn't really give away anything because they've got that peatland over there that they could activate. But yeah, if it's not just the peatland, it's probably is Chord of Calling they have here. Oh, they called for X equals 2, so they're making it really difficult for us to use the Hexcatcher here, which I don't think, you know, we'd have to sacrifice 4 creatures to stop this. So X equals 2, is that going to be Hepatra maybe? Or maybe a Prosperous Innkeeper? Oh wow, they get Badgermolka, which is interesting. I mean, maybe they just want to have enough mana that we can't use the Hexcatcher at all anymore, because this doubles up the mana off the Swamp and the Delighted Halfling here, which does make it difficult for me to use the Hexcatcher activations here. But yeah, Sphylen is huge here if they do have a way to get Yawgmoth in play. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So now X equals 4, we can't use the Hexcatcher to stop this, unfortunately, but they don't have a source of life gain, so yeah, maybe not getting in with that Trackhand Trainer early is going to make a difference, because that would deny them 2 Yawgmoth activations here. But yeah, Sphylen looking very, very important here. Yeah, so they're going after the Sphylen first, which is pretty spooky, especially because they've got 2 Young Wolves here. They can get a lot of card draw. but if they can't find a source of life gain, then that might limit what they can do. So I don't know, whether that's a Prosperous Innkeeper. They could maybe be on Dredge's Insight as well. Okay, there's another Badger Mole Cub. Gets them back a mana. Well, I guess technically 2 mana because of the second Badger Mole Cub. So that kind of pays for itself. And they go after their own Yawgmoth. So yeah, I guess they're just trying to draw Chord of Calling here to get Prosperous Innkeeper or maybe Sephiroth. I don't know what life gain source they're running. But we've just got to hope to dodge that if we can. If we can dodge a source of life gain, then we've got a good chance here, I think. Well, not a good chance because they've got a big board, but we've got a chance at the very least. And we have got a lot of card draw here. Okay, another Malevolent Rumble. Again, we can't really afford to use the Hex Catcher here, I don't think. Okay, there's a Dredge's Insight. And it's getting to the point now where we could potentially counter something, although they've still got a decent amount of mana available. Okay, they go for the Hapatra instead, which is interesting. Maybe they're just thinking if they can clog up the board, there's no way that we can attack past them. But we can assemble Harbinger plus Master to set up lethal. So now they're going to get a bunch of snakes off the Hapatra here. But it's interesting they're not going after my Sphylen. Like, I would assume if they just went after the Sphylen here, then they could start picking off our other creatures. I guess they just want to try and set it up so that if they find a chord off the top, that they can just win on the spot with like a Blood Artist style effect, right? Or like I said, maybe they just think that if they just clog up the board, there's no way that we can win. But, Master plus Harbinger does completely bypass whatever creatures the opponent has. Okay, there's Dredge's Insight, and they've not got any mana available, so very happy to stop this one, right? This is the effect that I was really worried about. And they don't have any more mana dorks in play, so if they don't have a Chord of Calling in the top 2 or in their hand right now, we do, get a decent chance, especially because we've got, so much card draw off the Trackhand Trainer available, right? If we draw into a Nykthos, especially off the Trackhand Trainer, then we've got a decent chance of finding Harbinger plus Master, which is what I'm trying to set up here. And there is Master. So I think we've just got to draw with the Trackhand Trainer and hope to find a Nykthos here. Or we could also actually, we can activate the Mindspring Merfolk and draw 4 cards off 2 mana here, right? So I'll lead on that. And if we can find a Nykthos here, we're in business. Oh, we find 2 and we found the Harbinger. That's sick. Okay. So now we can pump our mana into Nykthos, go for Harbinger, go for Master. Actually, I was going to say, and then we can sink into Stupid Yawgmoth. We probably should have done that first. But, again, if the opponent had Chord, they'd have probably used it by now. So I think we're still safe to bounce the Yawg here. I mean, I guess they've still got 2 activations, right? If they find Chord of Calling here. But, I mean, I guess if they find Chord, we can just activate Vidalian Hexcatcher to counter it at this point because they don't have any mana available, right? Okay, do they find Chord here? Let's see. Okay, so it doesn't look like they do, which is huge. Now we can just attack him with everything. And since their non-basics are turned into islands, we get unblockable. So yeah, that felt pretty crazy, right? I thought that if they got a Yawg in play, we'd be in real trouble because all of our creatures are so small, but managed to get their game 1. So post-sideboard, I've not actually faced Yawg yet, but I feel like this is a matchup for Mistcaller, and actually I keep meaning to change it to 4 Mistcaller 3 Counterspell. Hopefully that doesn't end up biting us here. And then I think we want Dismember as well. Good against their early mana dorks and can also take out Yawgmoth itself, as well as Badgermole Cub, which represents a pretty big road bump for them. So even though Svilen was pretty big last game, I think it's quite slow. And I think post-sideboard, my game plan wants to be use Mistcaller to stop Cord and Zenith to stop them getting Yawgmoth in the first place, use Dismember to take out their mana dorks to stop them getting Yawgmoth in the first place, get Harbinger down to cut them off their lands. I feel like post-sideboard with the tools we've got, we're better off trying to stop Yawgmoth getting in play in the first place, rather than running cards like Svilen that are good once they've already got Yawgmoth in play. Because I think last game, if they'd just gone after Svilen first and then taken out our other creatures, we probably don't have a chance of winning that game. So even though Svilen was good there, like I said, I think the goal, especially post-sideboard, should be to just stop Yawgmoth getting in play in the first place. But we do have quite a lot of tools for this matchup anyway, right? We've got good ways to stop their Zenith and Chords. If they just naturally draw Yawgmoth, then that's a bit of a concern. But, we should be getting onto the board early on. We've got tools to take out their mana dorks. So, yeah. Tricky matchup for sure, because Yawgmoth itself is very good against a lot of our smaller creatures. But we do also have quite a lot of Lord effects. So if we can get them in play in multiples before they find Yawgmoth or get it into play, then it's difficult. They have to use a lot of activations, and if we're applying pressure to their life total, they hopefully won't have that much life left to use with the Yawgmoth. So that's basically my game plan, going into post-sideboard games. Very happy with this hand, right? We've got Dismember, Trackhand, and Mindspring both work very well together, and then if we can get a Harbinger down on turn 3, if they don't have those basics again, that could really lock them out of doing anything impactful here. And no turn 1 play is also great to see. So I'm going to lead on the Mindspring Merfolk just in case they've brought in removal, right? I don't love running Trackhand out on turn 1 if we have an alternative option, because if they obviously kill it before we get the training grounds in play, then that's a bit annoying. So very happy to have Dismember here. Cutting them off the Badgermole Cub basically just cuts them off acceleration entirely going into their third turn. Now, it is a little bit awkward they found the basic Swamp, but if they don't have a basic Forest here as well, Harbinger next turn could do some damage here. They do have Badgermole Cub, which does give them access to green mana, unfortunately, so maybe Harbinger won't do that much, but still going to get it in play next turn, because it might make it a little bit awkward for them to cast stuff. And they Zenith... okay. That's pretty annoying, because now they do have access to basically all of their colours of mana, even through Harbinger, but I'm going to run it out here either way. It does make things a little bit awkward, especially with that Overgrown Tomb. Okay, there's Hapatra. Really hope they don't have Yawgmoth here, or we're in trouble. We basically just lose on the spot if they have a Yawgmoth here, I think. Because they can just wipe out our entire board without sacking their creatures. Wow, yeah. I think we're pretty much done this game then. I mean, this is why I really like having Mistcaller in the deck, though, because if we had a Mistcaller in play instead of that Mindspring Merfolk, we just counter the Cord there, and they're, the difference between this game with Yawgmoth and without is night and day, really. So yeah, I'm just going to scoop it up. There's no way we're winning this from this point, I don't think. So yeah, I mean, I kind of wish... It's been a few games here where I've been wanting to have access to 4 Mistcaller. I actually think I'm going to bring in a couple copies of Spell Pierce, actually, because Zenith and Chord of Calling are going to be their primary ways of finding Yawgmoth if they don't have one naturally. So I'm going to trim a couple of Tricksters for a couple of Spell Pierces here. And then trying to think if there's anything else we want in this matchup. Probably not. I'm just going to ship it back. But yeah, being on the play in this matchup should make a really big difference, I think. Okay, let's see what we open with here. Few too many lands, but I think Mistcaller into Hexcatcher with Spell Pierce backup is decent enough that I'm going to keep this, but it's pretty borderline. Right, if this Mistcaller was like a Mindspring Merfolk or something, this would definitely be, a good argument for a mulligan, but having access to Mistcaller, having access to Hexcatcher to actually get somewhat of a clock down early feels pretty big. Okay, so they got a basic, so obviously... Sorry, I'm just trying to think whether I want to go Mistcaller plus Spell Pierce or Hexcatcher here. I think I'm just going to go for the Hexcatcher. start, applying as much pressure as we can early on, and then we still do have access to counter spells. If they did go for Zenith X=1 here, we could counter it with the Hexcatcher if we wanted to. I guess Mistcaller does the same thing though, right? Okay, there's Badger Mold Carbon. They do have both basics, so again, Harbinger not going to be the best here. Oh, Dismember off the top is nice though. That enables us to attack with both creatures and cuts them off acceleration here. And then we have another Mistcaller, so if they are reliant on Zenith or Cord here, we're in good shape. We also have Spell Pierce available to counter those sorts of things, as well as cards like Malevolent Rumble or Dredge's Insight as well. So going to use Spell Pierce here rather than one of our creatures, because we do want to keep applying pressure, right? Especially against Yawgmoth, where their life total is very much a resource. Wow, we are flooding out pretty badly here though, but the opponent is also missing land drops, so... Wow, another Malevolent Rumble. I mean, I don't love getting rid of my creatures when we are flooding out here, but it looks like they are struggling for land, so we should stop this. Yeah, okay, they're missing land drops again. Okay, Mindspring Merfolk. That does give us a way to draw a bunch if they don't have a removal spell for it next turn, and it does look like the opponent's struggling. So we're flooding out, and they're getting mana screwed. There is the third land, though. See what they've got to cast here. Okay, Jet Collector, that does give them another mana immediately, right? Because they can get they've got enough cards in the graveyard to get the Mox. And now they have access to 2 mana on top of that. Okay, Marionette Apprentice. But we do have the Mindspring Merfolk is huge here, right? That represents potentially, drawing 3 cards here. Okay. So, I think I'm just going to attack with the Mistcaller here. Obviously, if they block, we can activate the Mindspring Merfolk, regardless of what they block with. Wow, they blocked them with the Marionette Apprentice. So here I'm going to draw 2. I still want to have Spell Pierce available. Wow, another Hexcatcher is pretty nice here. Especially because we now have the land to cast it as well. So they could potentially get a Yawgmoth down, but again, without life gain. Okay, there is Dredge's Insight. I mean, they do have enough mana to pay for Spell Pierce here, and I don't want to sack 3 creatures to stop that, so I'll allow that. But that's 2 of their 4 mana gone already, pretty much. So, and they do pick up the Soul Cauldron. I believe they milled over a Yawg as well, so it wouldn't surprise me if they just cast the Soul Cauldron here. In which case, I'm probably going to Spell Pierce it. Yeah, we will Spell Pierce it. Obviously, we could sack a creature, but when the opponent's at this lower life total, I think we want to just apply as much pressure as possible. Wow, okay, we drew another Lord as well. I mean, I think we'd have been good without it, but now we can attack in and then flash in the Hexcatcher, regardless of how they block here. Right, because if they block one of our 4/4s, we're getting in for 7 damage even without the Hexcatcher. Unless they have Snuff Out, maybe? No, okay, they just scoop up, so we got there, nice. Okay, so we're going second here. Opponent's taking a while to connect. I might edit it out if it does take them a while to get in. Okay, so got mulligan this one, unfortunately. Can't keep a 1-lander. This one I think we can keep. It is a little bit awkward. We don't have anything to play on turn 2 here, but we've got Mindspring Merfolk on 1. We've got a couple draw steps to find a 2-drop, and then we've got both Sviolent and Reedry on 3, which is pretty decent. Opponent also on a Mull to 5 as well. So lead on Thoughtseize. Wouldn't surprise if they took the Mindspring Merfolk to just cut us off a turn 1 play. Or I could also see them taking Sviolent, right? Thoughtseize decks typically struggle against Sviolent. Oh wow, they take the Reedry. I wasn't expecting that. Wow, another land, not exactly what we want to see here either. Makes me think they've also got second Thoughtseize, right? If they take the Reedry.
Or maybe they just have a removal spell that can take out this Phylon immediately. The only reason I say that is because Phylon can be tricky to deal with if you don't have Prismatic Vista to enable Revolt on Fatal Push, for example. Okay, yeah, they do have another Thoughtseize, so we're completely out of gas here, but... Oh, okay, Trackhand Trainer off the top is huge, because now we can just basically, you know, make a Training Grounds, activate Mindspring Merfolk to buff our board and draw, and then start drawing off the Trackhand Trainer long term as well. Okay, so the opponent does Fatal Push the Trackhand Trainer. We still get to put the Training Grounds into play, which does then mean that next turn we can potentially draw 3 cards if they don't have another removal spell here. Really hope they don't. Okay, they get an Underground Sewer. Okay, huge. So now Mindspring Merfolk gets to survive, and because of the Training Grounds here... Oh, and we find a Nykthos. I mean, that doesn't make any difference right now, but we can just ship it back. Activate Mindspring Merfolk during the opponent's end step, which then dodges any more discard spells, which is pretty big. Yeah, okay, they've got another Thoughtseize, so now we just wait until their end step. Activate the Mindspring Merfolk to draw 3. Ah, wow, their last card was Psychic Frog. Okay, that kind of sucks, but we do get to pull ahead in terms of card advantage here, which is pretty huge. So now we draw 3. Wow, we're really flooding out here. But we do draw a Harbinger, which, I mean, doesn't completely shut the opponent off the game at all because they've already got a basic swamp and they're running a blue deck anyway. So this is only going to really impact them if they have 2 black spells they want to cast. And then obviously because they don't have any cards in hand, we can actually attack into Psychic Frog for once because they can't discard anything here. And then we've also got Trickster to tap down the Psychic Frog as well next turn, which not only cuts them off a card, but then also... you know, enables us to attack freely. So opponent does also get to draw a card off the Psychic Frog here. Ooh, another Trackhand Trainer is very nice. Unfortunately, the Harbinger shuts off our own Nykthos here, but again, we're shutting them off double black spells here. And now we can start pumping mana into the Trackhand Trainer as well, right? We can obviously make another Training Grounds, and then we've got 1 mana draw card, which is going to be insane in this matchup, where it's very grindy, very attrition-based, usually. So I'm going to go for the Trickster now to stop them getting in with the Psychic Frog. Don't want them to draw on any, you know, any additional cards if we can avoid it. So we'll tap down the Psychic Frog here. Okay, and Baleful Strix. So that makes combat a little bit more difficult, but if we can find a Lord effect, especially a Master, off these Trackhand Trainer draws, then we're in really good shape here. Well, we basically should just win the game. Wow, okay, there's 2 Lord effects. That's huge. So I'm going to lead on the Hexcatcher just in case they have a removal spell here. Yeah, okay, opponent just keeps up. So we got there, nice. So here, Harbinger, not very good when they're already running blue themselves. You know, Master of the Pearl Trident is naturally going to be turned online here from their islands anyway. And then I think we just want a couple of Spell Pierce and a couple of counter spells just to be able to answer their spot removal and their sweepers. In fact, I'm going to bring in all 3 counter spells and just trim on a Sphylan here. Not 100% sure that's correct because Sphylan is one of the best cards, and having it in multiples does make you, you know, more resistant to Thoughtseize and counter spells for it. Not to mention that if you have a Sphylan in play in this matchup, you're probably going to be winning anyway, so maybe that's incorrect, but I like having the extra counter spells, especially because they're likely to be bringing board sweepers against you as well. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. So yeah, if the opponent does take a while to sideboard, I might just edit it out and we'll get straight into game 2. Okay, so game 2 obviously being on the draw here is going to be a little bit more difficult, but I've still felt pretty confident in this matchup so far. So this looks pretty good to me, right? We've got the Sphylan. Shoreline Scout not doing too much here, but if we do draw another Nykthos off the top, it's going to be very useful. And then Spell Pierce obviously going to be very useful if they have board sweepers or other interaction. Okay, they take the Trackhand Trainer, which makes sense. I think I'm just going to lead on Shoreline Scout here. We could obviously hold up Spell Pierce, but they're very unlikely to cast a non-creature spell during their turn, really, so makes much more sense to just get on the board. Okay, there's Psychic Frog. So thankfully we have Master here, which just enables us to attack freely because they already have an island in play, right? We have Island Walk, so we get in for 3 here already, put them down to 15. And then we've got Svilen next turn, or we could potentially go Trackhand plus Spell Pierce if we're worried about board sweepers. Okay, so opponent discards a land. Looks like they're trying to start racing here a little bit with the Psychic Frog. Okay, and there's Baleful Strix. So again, that is a little bit annoying, but only for the Master of the Pearl Trident specifically, right? Everything else we can just attack because we've got Island Walk, essentially. So here, like I said, we could go Trackhand Trainer, which is more appealing now we've got a Mindspring Merfolk. But I think while their shield's down, they don't have access to counter spells. It makes more sense to just go for Svilen here because we've got 2 Merfolk in play, so it'll have Indestructible. It gives our Master Ward 1 as well, which makes it more difficult for them to interact with it if they do have a Fatal Push or something like that. And then obviously, you know, now we've actually got a pretty big board presence. Having Spell Pierce to back that up feels pretty good. So, opponent attacks in... Okay, yeah, they exile the cards. I was going to say if they attack in here, that's telegraphing Fatal Push, because we can obviously block with Svilen while it has Indestructible. And they are discarding stuff, so they are trying to race here, by the looks of things. But they're pretty far behind in terms of both life total and board. See what they've got here. I mean, sweepers would be pretty scary, because if they do have... you know, a Toxic Deluge, for example, that'll completely wipe out our entire board, even though Svilen has Indestructible at the moment. Okay, another Psychic Frog, but again, we don't really care about that because we have Island Walk. So as long as this Master survives, and we do have Spell Pierce to back it up, and the opponent also knows that, but we now also have Counterspell as well, so... Oh, wow, and we have Hexcatcher, so... What I think I'm going to do here is I feel like we're basically guaranteed to win this race as long as we can defend Master of the Pearl Trident. So I'm just going to ship it back here, and then if the opponent does try to kill Master, we have Hexcatcher, Counterspell, and Spell Pierce all available in the same turn because we have 5 mana off Nykthos here. So I'm just going to ship it back, and unless they play something crazy that could win them the game this turn, I think I'm just going to do nothing and just hold open the Counterspells so that, you know, we can just keep this Master alive, and then that should basically guarantee the win next turn. And thankfully the opponent doesn't have enough cards in hand where they can set up lethal with Psychic Frog here, so I don't think we need to worry about dying this turn. Yeah, it looks like opponent's considering keeping the Psychic Frogs back, which makes me think they probably have a removal spell if they're doing that, right? Because... otherwise, they should, if they don't have a removal spell, they should just attack with the Psychic Frogs here, try and find a removal spell, and then block the Svilen with the Baleful Strix, which keeps them alive. So if they choose to hold the Psychic Frogs back here, that tells me they must have a Fatal Push. Because otherwise, these frogs can't actually block anything anyway, right? Yeah, they ship it back. So we can actually flash in the Hexcatcher here regardless, because we're during the end step. We're not going to lose this 3 mana. And if the opponent does try to end step kill the Master, we still have the mana available to Counterspell and Spell Pierce to back it up. Not to mention it has Ward as well. And again, we could play Master here, but that then cuts us off Counterspells during the combat step. So instead, I'm just going to attack him with the Shoreline Scout, the Svilen, and the Hexcatcher here. Wow, okay, yeah, opponent just keeps it up, so we got there, nice. Okay, so we're on the play here. And yeah, this looks good to me, right? Double Trackhand Trainer is always a sick opening because if we can get 2 Training Grounds in play, then we have access to 1 mana draw a card, which is, you know, huge. So we're against Gigantha here, which, from my experience, is either Is It Wizards or Jund. Okay, looks like it's Jund. And then taking Sink into Stupor isn't a bad choice here, because if we do miss a next land drop, that cuts us off Reejery and kind of stops us using Trackhand Trainer in multiples as well. But I could see an argument for taking Regery. I don't think Jund is probably going to be too worried about Trickster. Although it is, actually thinking about it, Trickster is very good against the Goyfs, right? It should shrink them down to 0/1s at instant speed. So maybe if they've got a hand with Barrow Goyf in, then they might take Trickster. Okay, they choose to take Regery, which I'm pretty happy about, if I'm being honest. I was mainly worried about them taking the Trackhand Trainer because if we can, like, especially against Jund, if we can get double Training Grounds down and we have access to 1-mana draw card, it's going to be really difficult for them to outgrind us in a longer game. So I'm just going to shift it back here, see what they've got. And even if they do have a removal spell here, they likely, unless they have exactly Black Land into double Fatal Push, we should be able to untap with at least one Trackhand Trainer, right? If they do Fatal Push one of them, we can just use that one to put a Training Grounds into play. So I have another Thoughtseize here. And taking Sync into Stupor doesn't really work anymore because if they do take Sync, we can just use Shoreline Scout to turn Trickster into another land here. Wow, 3 Thoughtseizes. So they take, okay, kind of makes sense, but now we've got double Trackhand Trainer, we can just draw out of those Thoughtseizes pretty easily here. So here, I think I'm going to use the Sink into Stupor. It's less mana efficient at what it's doing, but it does mean that we don't have to worry about Thoughtseize anymore, right? They know we have Sink into Stupor, so if they do have Jarsil here, for example, they know they're going to get value off it, whereas now we have Otawara in hand, which isn't guaranteed value, so... Okay, they do Fatal Push. If they have another removal spell, it's going to be a bit tricky here, but we should at least be able to draw 2, even if they do. Okay, doesn't look like they do though, so we get to draw 2 here, which is absolutely huge, especially when the opponent has used a lot of Thoughtseizes early on. Okay, double Master and Sphylen is pretty nice. So I think I'm just going to go for double Master here, right? Because we could obviously just pass back and draw a bunch, but I would rather use our mana more efficiently, get on the board, and Jund is very unlikely to have main deck sweepers, so if they do have a bunch of spot removal, they're kind of in an awkward position here where they probably should kill the Trackhand Trainer or we're just going to outgrind them into the longer game. But then we're still left with double Master in play, plus Sphylen, which gives them Ward, and we'll have Indestructible, so unless they do have main deck sweepers, I think we should be good this game, hopefully. Okay, they do get to flash back the Fatal Push here with the Jarsil. Presumably they have to take out the Trackhand Trainer here, but like I said, we're still left with double Master here, which is pretty sick. Wow, and another Trackhand off the top. I'm going to lead on the Sphylen just in case they have removal. Then they're forced to use it preemptively because we get Ward on our creatures. And they do trade with the Jarsil, but we can just run out Trackhand Trainer. Again, give Sphylen Indestructible. So I think we should be good here. Unless they've gone something crazy. Yeah, okay. Opponent scoops it up, so he managed to get there. So, against Jund, what do you want to bring in here? I mean, it's tricky because there aren't any massively obvious cuts either. A lot of the time when you're up against a blue deck, Harbinger's a pretty easy cut, but we do want Harbinger here because if they don't happen to have an early Prismatic Vista or just happen to naturally draw basics, it's very good against them. So I think we do want Dismember, and honestly, maybe I'm wrong to cut the Tricksters because it is very good against the Goyfs. We can shrink them down to 0/1, so I'm still trying to figure out the best way to sideboard in this sort of matchup, but I feel like especially with Jarsil and especially with Pyrogoyf, because they still get the ETB off it, that Trickster isn't that great. Trickster is only really effective in combat against the Goyfs, which is only really good against Barrogoyf, which Dismember should be good enough to kill the majority of times in the early game at the very least, so that's why I've ended up cutting the Tricksters for the Dismembers, but like I said, I haven't played this matchup a ton yet, so there's a chance it's correct to keep in Trickster and maybe cut something else. Not 100% sure. So this hand looks pretty good, and typically against Jund I tend to not mulligan if I can avoid it because of Thoughtseize. Okay, they got Inquisition. It'd be interesting to see what they take here. Maybe the Hexcatcher, because they don't really care as much about Master, well then they don't run any islands in their mana base. Yeah, okay, so they do take their Hexcatcher. I'm going to run out the Mindspring Merfolk here because obviously we could run out Trackhand Trainer to avoid discard spells, but we really do want to be able to get the Training Grounds off it if we can. So we'll see what the opponent's got here. Wow, Hexing Squelch is interesting. I guess that does stop our counter spells. So here, I'm just going to run out Trackhand Trainer and then get the training grounds, and then we can follow up with Master to buff. We'll have a bigger board presence because then we'll have 2/2s in play. Although there is Barrogoyf, and we obviously don't get Island Walk because they don't have any islands at the moment. But we get to put the training grounds in play here. And then, we could activate the Mindspring Merfolk to draw 3. Or we could run out the Master. It's tricky to know what to do. I'm going to run out the Master here because I feel like I want to apply pressure on the board, especially while they have Barrogoyf in play. Oh no, they have Culling Ritual. Okay, we made a mistake then. Because if I had waited there, I think we've got a decent... Well, not a decent chance because they still have a Barrogoyf in play, but we've got a reasonable chance at least of recovering, right? If we kept the Master in hand, we could have drawn 3 cards off the Mindspring Merfolk instead, and then we'd be relatively well equipped to rebuild. But now, yeah, okay. I mean, if I'd known they were running Culling Ritual, I definitely wouldn't have done that. And it's interesting that they're running Hexing Squelcher as a preemptive way to stop me countering Culling Ritual. So now that we know about that, I think we want to bring in the counter spells, even though we've seen Hexing Squelcher there. And then I think I'm going to trim a Regery to make room for the third counter spell. But yeah, that is tricky because I do want counter spells to stop Culling Ritual and Board Sweepers, which maybe I should have anticipated a little bit more, right? That is a pretty common sideboard card. Although having said that, Culling Ritual doesn't stop any of our 3-drops, so it's not actually that good against us generally. We just happen to have all 1 and 2 drops there. But I mean, counter spells are just generally good in this matchup. But yeah, if they get an early Hex Catcher down, that is going to be annoying, but I still think it's better to have more protection against Culling Ritual post sideboard. But again, I'm still figuring out how to sideboard in this matchup because I haven't played it a ton yet. So obviously being on the play here is going to make a pretty big difference. And I think I'm going to use Shoreline Scout here to get our third land by exiling the Mindspring Merfolk, because if we can resolve a Sviolin, especially with, Master plus Shoreline Scout in play, it's going to be really difficult for the opponent to remove. And if they have Thoughtseize here, I want a backup, so I like having the second Sviolin here, basically, because it's one of the best cards in this matchup, especially now that we know they're running Culling Ritual. And so I basically just want a backup to be able to play through spot removal early on if they can get rid of it before it has Indestructible. Or I guess they could also have Dismember, which means they can still kill it whilst it has Indestructible. So yeah, basically, Svilin's super important card, and I want to have a backup here to play through, removal or discard spells for it. So opponent runs out Nethergoyf. Not too worried about that yet, really. Obviously, it can grow pretty quickly, and it is a bit annoying they already have a Swamp in play, because even if we find a Harbinger, they can still kill it with with Snuff Out. Because obviously, it's tricky for them to kill with Fatal Push without having Revolt on command. And they have a basic Forest now as well. Okay, they do have Abrupt Decay for the Sviolin, but we should be able to give it Indestructible here, right? We play Shoreline Scout out first, and then play Sviolin. So again, they could have Dismember, but if they don't, it becomes pretty tricky, because now they need to kill one of the Shoreline Scouts, which obviously have Ward 1, and then kill the Pyrogoyf as well. Okay, they're forced to go face with the Pyrogoyf because of the Sviolin, which is obviously huge for us. I'm going to lead on the Master of the Pearl Trident here, just so they can't freely block the Sviolin with their Pyrogoyf. And then we'll attack with the Sviolin, see what we draw. Another Shoreline Scout here. So the question now is whether we want to go Trackhand plus Training Grounds, or whether we go Trackhand plus Shoreline Scout. I'm kind of tempted to go Training Grounds, but honestly, at this point, I think I'm just going to run out the Shoreline Scout and just apply as much pressure as possible. Because if they do have Culling Ritual here, it kills their own Nethergoyf, and we get to keep the Sviolin around. Plus, obviously, if they have, we're forcing them to have it. So getting this extra creature in play basically really forces them on the back foot. And even worst case scenario, if they do have Culling Ritual, we'll still likely have the Sviolin to, recover. And it is one of the best cards to recover with. But it doesn't look like they have Culling Ritual, which is huge. And they have to discard rather than losing life to take out the Master, which is huge for us as well. Ooh, and we find Nykthos. Okay, that's obviously sick with the Trackhand Trainer here. Gonna lead on the Sviolin attack first, though. And we do find Regery, which is pretty nice. So they block. I mean, we could have preemptively started activating the Trackhand Trainer, but I'm not really sure that's worth it. So before we activate Nykthos, I'm going to put Training Grounds in play to get an extra pip of Devotion. Then we'll activate Nykthos, and we might as well draw first just to see what we find. Okay, another Master. That's pretty nice, because then we can go Regery into Master, and now we're getting close to being able to do the infinite combo, right? I'm going to untap this Violin, but yeah, if we had 2 mana available, we could have just, untapped the Nykthos, activated the Trackhand Trainer a couple times to draw, play another Merfolk, untap Nykthos again, and basically just draw through our entire deck. So they do have another Goyf. They can take out the Regery, which is going to cut us off the combo here, and I think they're kind of forced to. Or they could take out the Trackhand Trainer, I guess. That's another way of getting around it, yeah. But I still think we're in a great position here. Wow, okay, especially with Hexcatcher off the top. So I'm going to run that out preemptively, because that then enables us to tap down the Barrow Goyf, and it obviously makes it harder for the opponent to use their interaction against us. Okay, Sink into Stupor off the top, that's pretty nice as well. Might as well use this preemptively. I don't think it's really going to make a difference, but we can bounce the Nether Goyf, which then forces them to chump with the Pyro Goyf, and that should be it, hopefully. Yeah, we managed to get there, nice. That felt pretty good.